Now, let's talk about the Chamber of Deputies, which decided to keep the list of passengers on the Air Force flight confidential, which led House President Hugo Motta to spend New Year's Eve in Angra dos Reis, Rio de Janeiro.
The president of the Chamber of Deputies, Hugo Motta, decided to hide the identity of his companions on trips made in Brazilian Air Force jets, fully paid for by us, mere taxpayers. In response to a request made under the Access to Information Law, the Chamber imposed total secrecy on the passenger list of a flight in which Motta left his state to spend New Year's Eve in Angra dos Reis in Rio de Janeiro. This decision outraged society, which had already been prevented from knowing who accompanied the deputy on another trip, which took place in December 2025, when Motta attended the Gilmar Palooza, a forum organized by Gilmar Mendes in Lisbon, where Supreme Court justices, members of the Brazilian government, deputies, and governors gathered. Such secrecy about public spending is viewed as mocking the public and undermining the armed forces' integrity, as they serve as luxury transport without being accountable to society. While politicians use Air Force jets like air taxis, the public keeps working hard to sustain a system that favors only a few. And the armed forces, which should uphold transparency, find themselves cornered by the impositions of Brazilian politicians. Welcome to life in the barracks. The situation within the armed forces is troubling. There are reports of a lack of ammunition, food, and even fuel for vehicles, aircraft, and vessels. In Rio de Janeiro, the Navy even imposed electricity rationing at the Naval War College, directly affecting the students and military personnel of that unit, highlighting the severity of the shortage. This scenario directly affects how the population views the armed forces. Institutions that have always been seen as pillars of trust are now facing discredit. Recent surveys indicate that almost 60% of Brazilians no longer trust the armed forces, an alarming figure for those who have always been considered the guardians of national sovereignty. The politicization of the barracks, which has been happening for many years, has contributed to this wear and tear. Institutions that should remain as state bodies began to get involved in temporary political decisions, allowing politicians to use their structure for their own benefit.
The first observation is that the armed forces do not belong to, nor have they ever belonged to, any president. They are the Brazilian armed forces, and that's what is stated in the Constitution. Secondly, I would like to make a distinction here. I think the greater involvement in these political matters happens through the military ministers, former generals, and admirals, but more from the reserves than necessarily from the military institutions themselves. The military institutions speak through their commanders.
The devaluation of the military career has led to a concerning exodus. Enlisted personnel, officers, doctors, senior officers, and even fighter pilots have requested discharge to pursue other careers, either in the civilian market or in other public institutions. Young people who once saw a military career as a source of pride for their families are now turning away from it, faced with low salaries, unfair advancement, hierarchical abuse, and a lack of future prospects. The devaluation of the A. A recent publication by the magazine Sociedade Militar brought a list of dismissals that even includes aviator captains and majors, showing that the attrition is not limited to enlisted personnel, but also reaches specialists and high-ranking officers. The situation reveals that the political class is managing to destroy the armed forces from the inside out. This process is not new, because for decades, regardless of the government, politicians and ministers have used the Air Force as if it were an exclusive transportation service, ignoring that every flight is public spending that should go to national defense. Hugo Motta's case is yet another example of the system's corruption. The secrecy imposed on the trips of the Speaker of the House reinforces the perception that the Brazilian people are treated as financiers of luxury. Deputies and ministers get high salaries and benefits, yet still use military resources for personal trips without transparency. The outrage grows because, while politicians enjoy privileges, soldiers face a lack of basic conditions to carry out their missions. The stark contrast between the office's luxury and the barracks' reality highlights institutional inequality. This chaotic situation calls for reflecting on the armed forces' role and how society can hold politicians more accountable, and a firm stance from the military institutions so that they can continue to live up to the trust of the Brazilian people. The improper use of Brazilian Air Force jets is not just a matter of expenses, but a direct attack on the credibility of the military institutions and the respect they have always had among the population. The inconsistency in Brazil is glaring. While the Brazilian government claims it does not have enough resources for essential areas like health, education, sanitation, and public security, there is no shortage of funds to mobilize and finance an entire support chain dedicated to transporting politicians in Brazilian Air Force jets. Crew, maintenance, fuel, and logistics are used to take authorities on trips around Brazil and even abroad, journeys that bring no concrete benefit to the nation. This practice turns the armed forces into obsolete luxury instruments, far from their true institutional role, which should be the defense of sovereignty and serving the population. Leave your opinion in the comments about the current situation and how the armed forces could prevent these abuses committed by Brazilian politicians. At Life in the Barracks, stay updated on military news. Like, subscribe, and check out the videos on your screen. Forward fighters, until next time.